The 2023 NFL Draft officially concluded their rookie season, so today I want to talk about the 7 biggest busts of the 2023-24 NFL Draft. Now for this list, I only decided to do first round picks because there were so many busts in this year's draft. So if you guys do want to see a part 2 of potentially the rest of the NFL draft, let me know in the comment section below. And one more thing before I actually start my list, I understand that these players are just in the rookie season, so they have plenty of time to match their potential. This is simply a list for just the most recent busts in this past season. So moving forward, guys on this list could potentially be very good players. It just so happened that they did not play good this most recent season. So that being said, let us start off with number 7, Will McDonald. Will McDonald was taken with the 15th overall pick by the New York Jets, and in his rookie season, it was a little bit of a disappointment. On the year, he only had 9 solo tackles, 3 sacks, and 1 forced fumble, and truth be told, he just did not receive a ton of playing time. And the bizarre thing about this pick is the fact that Will McDonald was really a second round talent, or at least a very late first round talent. He was nowhere near a 15th overall pick type of talent. Now yes, he had potential and he was very raw with his pass rush moves and just his size overall, but given the needs of the New York Jets, it was a very bizarre pick. This is the same team that doesn't really have a good receiving core and has a horrible offensive line, and we kind of all knew this heading into this most recent year, so it's not like this is a recency bias assessment of the New York Jets. And with guys like Anton Harrison, Christian Gonzalez, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, Deonte Banks even all still being available, they decided to go with Will McDonald. I understand you want to build up a strength along your defensive line, but to go out there and get a raw prospect over some certified players is a very questionable move in my decision. But let us move on to my number 6 player on this list. It is going to be Mazy Smith, the defensive tackle for the Dallas Cowboys. Mazy was taken with the 26th overall pick, and in his rookie year, he only had 9 solo tackles and 1 sack. Now here's the thing about defensive tackles, usually their statistics aren't that impressive, and it wasn't really impressive for Mazy Smith, but neither was his performance on the field. He was known as a big run-stuffing defensive tackle who can clog lanes and basically make you a one-dimensional team, and well, he played and he did none of that. In fact, the Dallas Cowboys were better off with him off the field in terms of whether it was a pass rush or it was a turn of a run stuff. I think as the season went on, he definitely got better, but he was very quiet in 90% of their games. I mean, hell, in their last 3 games against the Green Bay Packers in the playoffs, the Commanders in Week 17, and the Detroit Lions in Week 16, he produced 0 stats in any statistical category. Now, I understand when you're a run-stuffing defensive tackle, you're not really going to be able to get the stats, but regardless of how the stats looked, the play on the field was borderline unplayable. And with other options on the board like Brian Bresee, Brian Ranch, Anton Harrison, and Nolan Smith, the Dallas Cowboys, in my opinion, made the wrong move by getting Mazy Smith. And I understand that Dallas needed a big-time defensive tackle who can stuff the run, but in my opinion, this was by far a big reach. I had Mazy Smith as a second-round pick to maybe even a third-round pick, and for Dallas to take him at 26 and ultimately get what they got out of him, in my opinion, it was a terrible pick. But moving forward, we will have to see if he can potentially take the strides to become a good run stuffer in this league, but I don't know, it's just not a good pick in my opinion. But let's go ahead and move on to my number 5 player on this list. It is going to be Myles Murphy, the defensive lineman for the Cincinnati Bengals. Myles was selected with the 28th overall pick, and in his rookie year, he had 10 solo tackles and 3 total sacks. And let's get this out of the way, Myles Murphy wasn't very good. He didn't really receive a ton of playing time, and when he did play, 90% of the time he wasn't really producing. And while he did gather up 3 sacks on the year, I do think that his performance was a little bit of a disappointment. Of all the edge rushers in the second half of this year's first round, Myles Murphy was kind of thought to be the easiest transition to the NFL. He was somebody who you basically knew was going to walk into having a 5+ sack season, and well, that didn't happen. Now yes, he came into the league raw, but at the end of the day, they thought that he was going to produce at a high level early on. And of course, he didn't really do a whole lot. I think as the season went on and he got more playing time, I do think he played better, but as a whole, defensive line isn't really a huge need for the Cincinnati Bengals, especially at that edge rusher position. When guys like Michael Mayer, Brian Bresee, Nolan Smith are still available, I think you go out there and you take them. Instead, they went with building a strength in the edge rusher position, and I think it backfired on them. Again, this is a Bengals team that has a ton of needs, but they went after a position they already had a strength at, and at that, you got a guy with a very low upside. It just didn't make sense at the time, and to me, it still doesn't make any sense looking back on it in hindsight. Next up on my list, I have Emanuel Forbes, the 16th overall pick to the Washington Commanders. And on the season, Emanuel Forbes had 36 solo tackles, he was targeted 60 times and giving up 39 receptions, and had a PFF grade of 50.9. And here's the thing about Emanuel Forbes, I think as the season went on, I think he had some good moments. The problem is this, you took a guy who was super skinny and super limited with what he can do when it comes to press man coverage and put him into a system that likes to run some press man coverage. And now that Dan Quinn is in the building, they're going to run even more press man coverage. And well, Emanuel Forbes just does not have the build to do that. Now what I will say is this, For the future of Emanuel Forbes, which we're going to talk about the present, of course, but the future of Emanuel Forbes, I actually think with Dan Quinn, it could be better. At the end of the day, Dan Quinn did help turn guys like Deron Bland and Trevon Diggs into all-pro level players. And more specifically, Deron Bland is a little bit on the undersized part of things. Now, he's not as skinny as Emanuel Forbes, but he doesn't really have the size of a Trevon Diggs, for example, but yet he still went out there and played like an all-pro. So I am very interested to see what Emanuel Forbes does under Dan Quinn, but when it comes to this most recent year, he was a liability in coverage the entire season. In fact, there were several games where the coaching staff basically just pulled him from the game completely because of how badly he was getting exposed. Go watch AJ Brown cook Emanuel Forbes. It was one of the most embarrassing performances I've seen from a cornerback in years. And that was the thing with Emanuel Forbes. He was way too undersized, in my opinion, to be taken with the 16th overall pick, especially when you have guys like Deonte Banks and, of course, Christian Gonzalez still on the board. Let's not rewrite history here. Christian Gonzalez was thought to be a top 10 pick basically as a lock. And then he kept falling and falling and falling, and then the Washington Commanders pick came up, and I was like, that's a great spot for him. And then they went with Emanuel Forbes, which at the time was a questionable pick, and of course, in hindsight, it is still a very questionable pick. He was very much a project player over a refined player like Christian Gonzalez. I don't get it, but it happened. Let's go ahead and move on to number 3. My third player on this list is going to be Quinton Johnson, the receiver to the LA Chargers. He was taken with the 21st overall pick, and in his rookie season, he had 38 catches for 431 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, if you hear those bare-bones stats, you probably think that that wasn't a horrible season for him, but when you actually watched him play and actually got the context of everything, you'd realize that this was a horrible rookie year for Quinton Johnston. Quinton Johnston came into a system where he was going to be the third receiver in a stacked receiving room with guys like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, but then after injuries to Mike Williams, it was thought that Quinton Johnston would step up to fill in his spot. And unfortunately for the Chargers, that just wasn't the case. Now, let's say this, I never loved Quinton Johnson to the LA Chargers. I actually thought that Zay Flowers should have been the pick here, because I thought that while Quinton Johnson had a lot of potential, I thought what they were going to use him for wasn't really what they should be using him for. He's one of those weird type of players where he's so massive and so big that you automatically expect him to be like an Andre Johnson or Des Bryant-like player, but that is just simply not his game. He's actually kind of more of a slot player. He plays a little bit more like CeeDee Lamb than a guy like you'd think he would. This is a guy who needs to get the ball in his hand with space to create plays, and almost never will win a true one-on-one rep when it comes to jump ball. And just in general, right now his route running is not refined enough to really significantly beat a good cornerback on any given snap. And of course, with questionable hands, there was a lot to be concerned about with Quinton Johnston. Yet despite that, the LA Chargers decided to take him, knowing the fact that you already have Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, and he doesn't really fit your team. And of course, it bombed in their face. It also doesn't help this pick that Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison were the 2 picks right after their own pick. And of course, Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison had very good rookie seasons, and both players would have fit that team a lot better than Quinton Johnson did. And moving forward, I worry for Quinton Johnson in his future because I just don't know if he's a good fit with the LA Chargers. But with Jim Hart coming into town, I'm sure that he can find ways to get him the ball in space. But now we enter the top 2, but before we get to my second overall pick, I want to give a special shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy is the easiest and fastest growing fantasy sports app available. My favorite thing about Underdog Fantasy is their pick'em games. Simply pick higher or lower for your favorite player's stats, and you'll have a chance to win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Pick between 2 to 5 players in a pick'em entry, and if you get them right, you'll be able to earn some serious cash. I personally love playing these pick'em games on game day to add another level of excitement for my day. And you can too if you sign up today using the link in the description below. Make sure to use promo code METROSPORTS and you can get your first deposit doubled up to $100, as well as an instant pick'em special. Underdog Fantasy is available to you in many different states. Check the screen right now to see if your state is eligible. And again, make sure to download Underdog Fantasy using promo code METROSPORTS. And I want to give a special thank you to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring today's video. Alright, let's now talk about number 2, Tyreek Wilson, the Las Vegas Raiders' 7th overall pick. Now on the year, Tyreek Wilson had 1 forced fumble, 3.5 sacks, and 16 solo tackles. And after being taken in the top 10, everyone thought that Tyreek Wilson was going to be an immediate impact player. Standing at 6'6", 275 pounds, he obviously had the intangibles to be that guy. And well, it wasn't a very good season for him, especially in the first half of the year. Now, what I will say about Tyreek Wilson is that in the second half of the year, minus the Indianapolis Colts game, I thought that he played pretty well. He may have not been getting the general stats, but I thought he was doing a good job of creating pressure, being improved in the pass rush and in the run fits. But as a whole in his rookie season, for being the 7th overall pick, he had a very disappointing season. With guys like Jalen Carter, Peter Skoronski, Lucas Van Ness, Broderick Jones still being on the board, taking a guy like Tyreek Wilson number 7 was understandable, but at the same time, didn't really benefit them this season. I completely understand wanting to pair Tyreek Wilson up next to a guy like Max Crosby for the future, but this year just did not work out. And I do think moving forward, he does have a bright future. I mean, at the end of the day, there was a reason why he was taken number 7 overall. At Texas Tech, he showed a lot of different flashes, and I do think in the NFL it will pan out eventually. But as it sits, for a 7th overall pick to only have 3.5 sacks is a little bit disappointing in my opinion. But again, in the future, I think he's going to be a good player. It's just going to be something that I think time will tell. He does have a lot of talent and a lot of potential, and I think it should be interesting. Now, if the Raiders can get Tyreek Wilson to reach his potential and be that true number 2 guy next to Max Crosby, that defensive line can be damn scary. But if it doesn't pan out, they're going to be asking themselves a lot of questions about what they're drafting, because it seems to be a pretty consistent theme for the Las Vegas Raiders to miss out on their first round talents, especially when there's a Jalen Carter on the board. But of course, number 1, and I think all of you guys expected it, it is of course Bryce Young. And let me be honest with this pick, this is a little bit unfair. Bryce Young was given basically a bunch of Scrooges as his teammates. His weapons were Hayden Hurst and Adam Thielen. He had a regressing running back to go along with a regressing offensive line, to go along with a defense that disappointed. And of course, he had Frank Reich as his head coach for 90% of the season. But now with a new head coach and some new systems coming into play, I do think that Bryce Young does have a brighter future than a lot of people think he does. I understand that on the year he failed to reach 3,000 yards and failed to even hit 12 touchdowns. I mean, he had 2,877 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, which is obviously not very good. But I think when you unravel the truth about Bryce Young and what he's going to be moving forward, I think it tells a pretty bright future. This is a guy with good pocket presence. He does a good job of getting the ball with accuracy and touch. He may not have the cannon of the arm or maybe the improvisation skills of a guy like Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, but I do think moving forward he could be a good quarterback. When I saw him out of college, I thought that he could be potentially very similar to a guy like Russell Wilson. And I'm not just going to take that back after 1 year. I still think that he has a super bright future. Now, if I'm Carolina, you have to do a good job of surrounding him with genuinely good pieces. I think T. Higgins has to be a priority this offseason, because if you can genuinely surround Bryce Young with talent, I think it's going to be a good thing. But for now, it wasn't a good thing. We'll have more content on Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers in the future, but for right now, let's just talk about their most recent season. And yes, it was a disappointment. I thought that Bryce Young was going to come into this season and be playing at a Rookie of the Year like level, but when everything around you is disappointing and everything around you just sucks, it's hard to really perform up to the level of standard that you have for yourself. And it also does suck to add on to this, but CJ Stroud was the 2nd overall pick and played like a MVP for half the season. So forevermore, we're going to be comparing CJ Stroud with Bryce Young, and if CJ Stroud continues to play better than Bryce Young, it's going to be seen as a huge bad pick for the Carolina Panthers, even if Bryce Young does pan out to be a good quarterback in this league. But again, that's just because we're going to be comparing these guys over and over for the rest of their careers. But that will conclude my video. If you guys did enjoy, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, and let me know in the comment section below who you guys think was the biggest bust of the season. But I love you guys. Peace.